The morning the nurse wheeled in the consent forms, the sky over the hospital parking garage was the color of a bruise turning yellow. The unit smelled like lemon disinfectant, warm plastic, and that particular broth of coffee that's been sitting on a burner since someone said, "We'll make a fresh pot after rounds." In room 612, Margaret Lane, Maggie to people who had earned it, adjusted the braided cord of her reading glasses and signed where the yellow tabs told her to. Her hands were thinner than they'd ever been, skin so fine the veins looked like a road atlas. She wrote carefully, the way a woman writes when ink still means something. Margaretlane. Release of information, read the nurse, skating a pen cap along the page. Authorization to obtain your prior records from St. Bridget's Community Hospital, Youngstown, Ohio. Approximate date range? Maggie said, 85. Neurology consult. Maybe 86, if there were addendums. The nurse, young, ponytail like a metronome, checked a box. Purpose of request? Maggie looked at the ceiling tile as if there might be a kinder word up there than the one she had carried for 37 years. For truth, she said. Then, because the form wasn't built for poetry, she added, continuity of care. Dr. Reyes came in on the tail of the nurse's last sentence, stethoscope slung like a loose promise around her neck. She was the kind of attending who read charts like novels and rooms like maps. Behind her, a resident in a navy fleece vest with an embroidered hospital logo hovered in the doorway, hands in pockets, because he didn't trust them not to fidget. "Miss Lane," Dr. Reyes said, voice low and even, "I hear we're taking a little trip to 1985. Maggie smiled without showing teeth. "I'd like to bring back a souvenir." She touched the edge of the forms. "Something I can hold up to myself and say, here, this is where everything bent." Outside Maggie's window, the medevac helicopter lifted without apology, blades chopping the morning into measurable parts. Inside, the resident, Kapoor, his badge said. Anil, his eyes said, pulled the lone vinyl chair closer to the bed. "You said the consult was for Huntington's. Family history and a funny fall," Maggie said. "I'd tripped on the church steps twice that month. My aunt had had something we didn't name back then, a shakiness everyone called nerves. The neurologist poked and prodded and watched me walk and told me to prepare myself. He said we didn't have the gene test yet, not until, the 90s. But that clinically he was confident. He asked if I had children. I said no. He said, perhaps that's for the best. He didn't write that part down." She smoothed the sheet with the side of her hand. "It's hard to outlive a sentence handed to you by a man in a white coat. You either fight it every morning, or you start living in a waiting room, listening for your name." Reyes listened like the room belonged to Maggie, and the rest of them were borrowing chairs. Pancreatic cancer had shown up in a scan 6 months earlier, uninvited and already comfortable. They'd tried to make it uncomfortable. It stayed. "We'll get the file," she said. "Our release of information folks are persistent." St. Bridget's merged with St. Mark's, which merged with a system called Pine Ridge, which shuttered the paper basement a decade ago. But there's always a basement somewhere. Someone kept the microfilm because someone always does. Hospitals are held together by nurses, stubborn secretaries, and women named Dolores, who can find anything on a shelf. Maggie closed her eyes, as if picturing not the past, but the woman who kept it. When she opened them, she pressed 2 fingertips to her wrist where a pulse knocked like a neighbor through the wall. "If you do find it," she said softly, "don't be gentle with the truth. I don't have time for gentleness now." In the bowels of the building, fluorescent lights hummed above a room with a carpet the color of old oatmeal and a sign that said, in a font from another century, Health Information Management. A woman with short silver hair and glasses on a chain introduced herself as Dolores, because of course she did. "Pine Ridge sent a drive of scans 8 years ago when they cleaned out their archives," she said, tapping a keyboard that had survived more coffee spills than policy changes. "But if it's older than 90, it's likely on fiche. I might have to wake up the dinosaur." The dinosaur was a microfilm reader that sat like a squat confession booth at the back of the office. It smelled faintly of warm dust and library. Dr. Reyes had sent the resident as envoy. Kapoor stood there in his fleece vest, feeling both absurd and reverent. Dolores fed a rectangular sleeve into the machine with the same tenderness other people reserved for slipping a baptismal gown over a baby's head. The glass lit up. He watched a negative world swing into view, white letters floating in black seas, blocky dates like coordinates. "Lane Margaret," Dolores muttered, more to the catalogue than to him. "Admit, 04-12-1985, neurology consult, MRN. Oh, but look at that." She hit a key. The image shuddered. Another Lane, Lane with a Y. Same first name, same month. "People think clerks don't know stories," she said, eyes not leaving the focus wheel. "We know every way a story can go wrong." She cranked the wheel, and 1985 bloomed. Scanned admission face sheet. A name, an address on Willow Street in Youngstown. A phone number that had too many sevens. An insurance field that said Blue Cross. Next image, hand-typed, consultation note, neurology. The signature at the bottom was a flourish that might have said R.K. Benning, M.D., or might have been a seismograph of a small earthquake. Kapoor leaned in. The language was clinical and certain in the way that makes interns feel both safe and queasy. 32F with family HX, significant for choriform movement disorder. Reports falls X2, exam notable for subtle chorea, milkmaid's grip equivocal, tongue protrusion intermittent. Diagnosis consistent with Huntington's disease, genetic testing not yet available. Counseling provided regarding heredity, advised to avoid pregnancy. There was the sentence, there was the life it had stamped. Dolores was already sliding another sleeve into the tray. Now let's look at the other Margaret. Another face sheet. Another Willow. Willow Lane this time, not street. And there, the year of birth 1 year earlier. The social security number with a transposed pair of digits. Consultation note. Neurology. Same day, same doctor. But here, the description was not Maggie at all. 33F. With involuntary movements, X2 years, family history positive, father institutionalized. Marked chorea on exam dysarthria, gait disturbance. Kapoor felt the smallest wind of it, the way a room changes when someone opens a window down the hall. "Same day," he said. "2 consults, 2 Margarets, 1 letter different in the last name, 1 digit off in the SSN. He pointed to the accession stamps. "And see that? The text stamp on the first one looks like it got rerun through the machine. Blurry, as if 2 charts traveled together and someone got tired and made the wrong stack." Dolores pinched the bridge of her nose and said a word that in another office would have resulted in an HR email. 85 was a strike year at St. Brigid's, she said, not looking up. They brought in temps, filers who didn't know the neighborhoods or the families. Lane and Lane looked like cousins to a stranger in a hurry. He found what the consultant had written for Maggie's follow-up. Return to clinic in 6 months. Confirmatory testing when available. There'd been no follow-up note in the fiche that followed. No 6-month visit, no patient did not return, no genetic test in the 90s when the world learned to count CAG repeats and call it destiny. Kapoor ran his finger along the edge of the viewer, a nervous habit he'd brought from exam rooms to this dimly lit reliquary. So our Maggie was given a diagnosis on the strength of an exam that described someone else's symptoms on someone else's body, he said, slower than he felt. And the note advising her not to become a mother, he let the sentence stay unfinished because the rest of it felt indecent. Dolores, who had seen papers harm and save in equal measure, pulled a flatbed scanner closer. "Let's not do righteous indignation without PDFs," she said. "We'll scan both consults, both faces sheets, the SSNs, the addresses. We'll show the transposed digits. We'll build a chain even a risk manager can follow with their eyes closed." She pressed the button. The machine hummed and took a picture of the past. Reyes met them in her office, took the printouts, and read them through twice. She didn't speak until the second pass put her anger back in its scabbard. "We can amend," she said. "HIPAA gives patients the right to request correction of records. St. Brigid's no longer exists, but the parent system does. We'll submit an amendment with evidence of error. We'll ask for a formal letter acknowledging the misfile. Risk management should be looped. Ethics too." "And Ms. Lane?" Kapoor asked. Reyes placed her palms flat on the desk, the way a person does when steady matters more than speed. "We'll tell her we found something and ask if she wants to hear it sitting up or lying down." When they walked back into 612, Maggie was wheeling the tray table over her lap with a patience she had not always had. She looked at their faces like a teacher looking at students returning from a field trip, either triumphant or covered in mud. "Well," she said, "does truth have a shape today?" Reyes sat opposite her, spine the kind you could hang a coat on without bending the hanger. "We found your consult. We also found another consult written the same day for a woman whose last name differs from yours by one letter. The clinical description in your note reads like hers. The identifiers in yours have a transposed number. We think the diagnosis you were given in 1985 was recorded on the wrong chart. The evidence is strong." Maggie's hand went to her throat, not to the oxygen cannula, but to where, for years, she had held the worry like a necklace she forgot she could unclasp. "Say that again," she said, voice steady because it had learned to be. Reyes did, no fluff. Maggie listened as if the room had become a cathedral. She didn't cry. Instead, she laughed once, an astonished, tiny thing, like the first cough after anesthesia, and then she closed her eyes and let her head tip back. "Well," she said when she could speak without breaking anything inside, "isn't that a hell of a souvenir?" She reached for the handrail of the bed, as if to pull herself slightly forward. Kapoor stepped without thinking to adjust the pillows. She patted his wrist. "Doctor," she said, "did you ever want children?" He looked like a man who had not rehearsed that question on rounds. "Yes," he said softly. "Someday." "Then count their fingers for me when they come," Maggie said. "Count them twice. And when you sign something, sign it like the world depends on it, because sometimes it does." The helicopter left again, carrying its own weather. In 612, they discussed amendments and letters and apologies that would never come from the men who needed to say them. Maggie listened and nodded, and then, when the paperwork had been petting Zood into its pen, she asked the only question that mattered to the life she had left. "How do we live with it?" She meant the time. Reyes, who had seen regret like a second illness in so many, answered the only way anyone could answer honestly. "Together," she said, "and from right now." Maggie looked at the window and saw not the parking garage, but a set of church steps in the spring of 1985, her shoes damp from a last patch of snow, her breath making a small fog of itself, her future breaking into 2 lanes, and someone, no face, just a pen, setting up a barricade on the one with trees. She took a breath that had more room in it than the one before. "Then let's start with lunch," she said, surprising herself. "And if they bring Jell-O, tell them to bring red, not green. I've been eating the green for 37 years because I thought I had to." Downstairs, Dolores labeled a PDF with more care than some people named their children. Upstairs, a woman took the first bite of a red dessert she no longer felt compelled to pretend she liked. The world righted itself by degrees, not inches. Outside, the day peeled back a little sun from behind the bruise. The letter came 3 days later in an envelope whose corner announced Pine Ridge Health Systems in a font that tried to be modern and missed. The release of information clerk hand-delivered it to room 612 with the solemnity of a deacon. Dr. Reyes broke the seal because hands are instruments and some ceremonies require a steady one. Maggie watched with the same attention she once brought to Mass in the basement of St. Luke's on windy Sundays, when the folding chairs would clink against each other every time the congregation stood. "Dear Ms. Lane," Reyes read, We are writing in response to your request to amend the medical record associated with your 1985 neurology consultation at St. Brigid's Community Hospital, now Pine Ridge Systems. After review of available documentation, including face sheets and consultation notes from 2 patients seen on the same date, we acknowledge an error in filing and indexing that likely resulted in an incorrect diagnostic impression being attached to your chart. We have corrected the record to reflect that a definitive diagnosis of Huntington's disease was not established in your case, and we apologize for the distress this may have caused. Sincerely, Office of Medical Records, Pine Ridge Health Systems. Maggie held the paper like it might float away. Explain that to anyone who thinks words don't weigh anything, she thought. She folded it once, twice, not to hide it, but to fit it near her heart when she pressed it there. I'll keep this, she said, next to the Polaroid in my wallet. The one with my father and me at the Mahoning River, where he said the fish weren't biting because they were all downstream at the Warren Fair. Reyes had seen 1,000 apologies and 100 that mattered. This one was still typed, it still wore a corporate logo, it still used that word distress the way bureaucrats use umbrellas. But the correction had already hit the system. A note in the chart said, erroneous entry acknowledged, patient's record amended to reflect no confirmed diagnosis of Huntington's disease in 1985. It wasn't a time machine. It was a sentence rewritten at last. Who should we tell? Reyes asked, which is another way of asking, how do you want the past to behave now? Maggie looked at the window out of habit. The glass did not answer her. There's a man named Peter Harrigan, she said. We were engaged. He wanted 4 children and a St. Bernard and a fence with white paint that would peel in someone else's lifetime. I'd left the ring on his dashboard with a note because I loved him enough to obey a doctor who might have been talking to the woman in the next room. If he's alive, he deserves to know that I didn't leave because I was fickle. She winced, not from memory, but from a stab under her ribs that was the reason she was here at all. And my sister, she added. We have been careful with each other. It is time to be honest the way you open a window in a house that's been shut too long, Reyes nodded. We can ask social work to help locate Mr. Harrigan. We can invite your sister in any way that feels like mercy. Mercy, Maggie repeated, as if trying on a coat in spring, and finding it still fits. She glanced at the resident. Dr. Kapoor, would you humor an old woman and fetch me my purse? There's a phone number written in pencil behind a library card older than you. He brought it with the care one brings a sacrament. Maggie pulled out a card stamped Public Library of Youngstown and Mahoning County, and behind it a scrap of paper with Peter's old office line and a note. She had done herself the favor of keeping it for who he became after her, Harrigan and Sons Construction. She smiled at the handwriting. I didn't keep it to call, she said. I kept it to punish myself. Today I will use it to be decent. Reyes dialed. An assistant who sounded like coffee and deadlines answered, then a man's voice, older but still with the iron filings in it that drew nails to his humor. Peter Harrigan. Mr. Harrigan, Reyes said, professional and human in the same breath. My name is Dr. Isabel Reyes. I'm calling from St. Luke's Medical Center. I have a patient who would like to speak with you, if you're willing. Her name is Margaret Lane. On the other end of the line, a pause that had weight and shape. Then, put me through. Reyes handed Maggie the phone, as if it were a bird that might panic and escape. Peter, Maggie said, lighter than she had been in years. It's me. Silence. Then a sound like a man sitting down hard. Mags, he said. And all the asphalt years between 1985 and now lay down and let them walk. Are you okay? I'm dying, she said, because she had promised herself the truth. But not the way we thought. I wanted you to know that the reason I left is the reason I shouldn't have. The diagnosis was wrong. The hospital just apologized. Well, as much as a hospital apologizes. I am sorry I left the way I did. I was trying to spare you from a life you didn't sign up for. Peter exhaled into the receiver. "We're 68 years late to a dance," he said softly. "I should be furious at time, but right now I'm just glad you called." He asked if he could visit. She said yes. They agreed on the next afternoon, which might as well have been a decade sooner for the way Maggie's face opened. She hung up and let the phone rest against the blanket like a warmed stone. Her sister, Anne, arrived that evening carrying a tote bag with knitting and almonds, and the kind of apology you practice on the drive over until it breaks into smaller words you can say. She and Maggie had been polite for 30 years, the way people are when they think the other person might snap if handled wrong. The amended record sat on the bedside table next to a plastic cup of red jello that looked absurdly like courage. Anne put her hand on the paper, on top of the corporate logo and the serif letters, as if she could pin a butterfly to a page without harming it. "So you didn't keep me from nieces and nephews out of spite," she said with a laugh that had the texture of tears. "You kept the whole world from yourself out of fear." "Out of obedience, which is a cousin of fear," Maggie answered. "I would do it differently. I did everything differently. Forgive me for the parts where I chose wrong." Anne shook her head. "I will forgive anyone who lived through the 80s in this country with their heart still inside them." She squeezed Maggie's fingers. "And you, big sister, kept yours right where it belonged." They spoke then of things neither had said out loud, of their father's silence after the mill closed, of their mother's bingo nights that were more rescue mission than pastime, of Christmases where they smiled for the camera and ate ham like it counted as peace. They said names they had stopped saying. They let the room fill with their actual voices instead of the ones they used to leave careful messages. The nurse came in twice and left twice without interrupting, because some care is learned on the job and some at birth. The next afternoon, Peter Harrigan walked into 612 in a jacket that still remembered the smell of sawdust. He brought flowers that looked like they belonged at a wedding because old men carry forward what they remember how to do. He set them on the tray table and took Maggie's hand. They didn't trade back all the years. They looked at each other and let the arithmetic do what it does, add what could be added, subtract what couldn't. "I built the fence," he said wryly. "It peeled. Sons did come, and one daughter. None of them is a St. Bernard." He looked at her face, and then at the apology letter, and then at Dr. Reyes, who hovered like a guardian in sneakers. "I'm not here to say what might have been," he added. "I'm here to sit a while in what is." They sat. They spoke about the old bowling league at Holiday Lanes, where Maggie's hook could have taught mathematics, about the 4-day blackout of '88, when every candle in the cup drawer earned its keep, about the way Ohio nights in August give you 1 hour of mercy before the mosquitoes carry it away. They said, "Remember and still and enough." Peter laughed at a joke Maggie told in 1979 and remembered now with better timing. When he left, he kissed her forehead the way a man kisses the forehead of the woman he doesn't get to keep. After he was gone, Maggie asked Reyes to help her write one more letter, this one to the other Margaret, the Lane with a I, whose chart had been more hers than her own. Dolores, saint of the basement, had already looked and found an obituary. Margaret Elaine Lane, 1952-1991. "She didn't make it," Dolores had said softly. "Huntington's took her fast." Maggie dictated to Kapoor, who kept his pen still when his throat wanted to jump. "Dear family of Margaret Lane," she said, "I learned yesterday that a mistake in 1985 wrapped my life around your mother's story. I want you to know I have thought of the woman whose diagnosis I carried, without knowing her name, as a shadow sister. I write to say I am sorry that our charts crossed, that the world was unjust to both of us in different ways, and that I will speak your mother's name at breakfast tomorrow with gratitude for the fact that her truth is now properly hers again." They addressed it to a P.O. box found in the obituary's guest book and left the rest to the stubborn postal gods. Some apologies need a route more than they need a receipt. There were practical endings too. Risk management asked for a meeting. Maggie declined and suggested they invite young doctors to it instead. "Teach them that a transposed number can be a broken heart," she wrote back. The ethics committee drafted a case study. The 1985 era, systems, surnames, and the weight of words. In him, Dolores labeled a folder Lane, amendment, and left a sticky note for her successor, in case one day someone needed to know why a file in the L drawer contains a copy of a letter that made two sisters talk like sisters again. On her last good afternoon, Maggie asked to be taken to the roof garden so she could see the river do its slow work of making sense of a city. The volunteer wheeled her out, blanket over her lap in the old lady fashion she once promised herself she'd never accept, and now did with good humor. Dr. Reyes found her there, face turned to a slice of sun. "I've been thinking," Maggie said without opening her eyes, "about all the Wednesdays I spent not buying the white fence paint, about the babies I didn't have because I thought my body would betray them. And I have been tempted, oh I have, to tally all the things I lost, as if I were balancing the ledger after a long winter." She opened her eyes and looked at Reyes. "But then I think of Dolores's hands on that microfilm reader, and of Anne's laugh last night, and of Peter's flowers that looked ridiculous and perfect, and of you telling the truth like a woman who carries decent news and hard news in the same pocket. And I decide the ledger can stay messy. The line that matters got corrected before I went." Reyes squeezed the push bar of the wheelchair. "If we had a chapel for regret," she said, "it would run out of candles. Better to light one for the person you are right now." Maggie's mouth made the shape of a thanks that didn't need sound. "I'll light one for Dolores, too," she added, "because justice sometimes is spelled with a lowercase j and a good pen." She looked out at the river again. "You know what I wish?" she asked after a quiet stretch that wasn't solemn so much as full. "What?" "That 25-year-olds could sit here with me for 10 minutes and learn the difference between fear and obedience," Maggie said. "And that 32-year-old doctors would sign their notes like the patient will read them aloud to someone they love." She shook her head, amused at her own sudden habit of sending out commandments. "Look at me, trying to leave a catechism." Reyes smiled. "I'll issue it as a memo." When the pain came back and stayed, they kept promises made in daylight. Hospice arrived like a competent aunt, soft shoes, clear eyes, hands that knew how to fold corners. Anne knit at the bedside, needles clicking in a rhythm that said, "We are here, we are here, we are here." Peter came once more and then again, sitting with the dignity of a man who once knew how to swing a hammer all day and still take his wife dancing. Kapoor stood at the foot of the bed and learned how to breathe with a patient in the room, without using up the air. On Maggie's last morning, the red jello on the tray wobbled once when a truck on the street below hit a pothole. She didn't eat it. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The amended record lay in the drawer with the suctioned cup's straw. Reyes touched it once and closed the drawer with 2 fingers, as if tucking in a child. When the nurse straightened the sheet one last time, Anne laid the library card and the apology letter on Maggie's chest, just for a moment, and then put them away for the living. Peter took a small piece of the beaded rosary from the manila envelope and tied it to the stem of the ridiculous wedding flowers, now a little tired, still themselves. Dolores wrote a note in her ledger in the basement. Lane. Paper sent to family. She didn't need to, not really. But that is how women like Dolores keep the world from losing things. At the service the following week, Father Martin said as much God as anyone could stand, and then Anne stood with her hands shaking and told the real story. A diagnosis misplaced by a letter and a digit, a life bent around it, a hospital that admitted in time for the right people to hear, and a woman who learned to forgive sums that didn't add up. She held up a spoon from Maggie's kitchen drawer. She stirred her coffee with this every morning as if to say, "Still here." She set it back down. After, in the church basement where the folding chairs clinked against each other, just as they had 30 years ago, people told stories about the woman who moved through Youngstown with a quiet laugh and an iron back. Peter put his hand flat on the table where someone had set a plate of ham and deviled eggs and looked at Anne across a river that finally looked crossable. "She would have been a wonderful mother," he said softly. She mothered us anyway, Anne answered, and was not wrong. In a file room miles away, 2 consult notes written on the same spring day in 1985 finally sat where they belonged, like siblings returned to the right houses. The past did not change, it behaved. That will have to be enough, Maggie had told Reyes on the roof. And then, with her last good breath under a slice of sun, she had added the only instruction a person can leave that holds up under weather. Tell the truth faster next time.